Hi everyone, welcome to the sunflower class. I've split this class into two videos. The first video has the flower itself, plus I'll show you how I stretch the paper before I start. And the second video has the leaves and how I take the paper off my board when I'm finished. Now there's a couple of things I want to mention that I didn't mention in the video. When I stretch the paper, I use staples to make sure the water activated tape doesn't lift off my paper. Now I use gator board to attach my paper to, and gator board is soft in the middle, so the staples that I use are just from an ordinary stapler. If you're using a wooden board, you're going to need a heavy duty stapler like this one. The other thing to remember if you're using a wooden board is to make sure you seal the board with sealer before you use it, because you don't want any of the tannins or chemicals in the wood to leach out onto your paper. I use both water activated tape and staples to secure my paper to the board. Now you can skip the water activated tape and just use the staples. I'm a bit pedantic about my paper being really flat. I've just used the staples in the past without the tape and it works okay, but I think the water activated tape just keeps it a little bit flatter. So try both ways and see for yourself which you prefer. Alright, so take your time with your painting, don't rush it, and I hope you enjoy it. For this painting I'm going to be using Arches cold press watercolour paper. This is A3 size and it's 300 GSM in weight. This is just a watercolour pad that I have. I'm just going to tear a piece of paper off and I'll show you how I stretch it. I've printed off my sunflower photograph to the size that I want. It's just on two pieces of paper and I've just stuck them together. So then I'll use this to trace the sunflower onto the paper. So the first thing I want to do is just measure off a couple of lines about 1.5 centimetres in from the edge of the paper, just so that when I use the water activated tape I'll be able to place it on the paper so that it's straight and not crooked. So I just measure in some marks about 1.5 centimetres in from the edge. I've got some Sarrel transfer paper here. I'm going to use this to transfer the sunflower onto the paper. This just comes on a roll and I've cut a sheet here about the size that I need. I'm also going to use a gator board to attach my paper to the board, and this is just a lightweight board made of foam. It's got a hard covering. I just bought this at my art supply store. So I just place the Sarrel paper underneath and then I get a stylus just to start tracing over the sunflower. You can also just use a pencil or a biro. You don't have to use a stylus to transfer the drawing. You can transfer the drawing to the paper either before or after you've stretched it. It doesn't really matter what order you do it in. I tend to put the drawing on the paper before I stretch it. Okay, so I'll just take this off carefully and I'll see what I'm left with. So then I can come in with my pencil and just draw in anything that I've missed and fix things that I need to fix. This is water activated tape that I use to stick the paper to the board with. This is sticky on one side when you wet it with water. You might also find that it comes in a brown colour like this one. So I measure the water activated tape against my paper and I just cut it slightly longer than I need it, just so I've got some overhang. So I measure all four sides, and then when they're cut I move the water activated tape well away from where I'll be working because the paper will be wet and I don't want the water activated tape to get wet before I'm ready for it. I've got my paper soaking in some cold water in the bath. Now Arches watercolour paper is gelatin sized to the core, so this sizing stops water from soaking into the paper too quickly. It helps to preserve the brightness and the transparency of the colours, and it also gives the paper extra strength so that it will resist rubbing and scratching without it tearing and linting. So you don't want to wash the sizing out of the paper because it's critical to how well it will perform. So I usually leave my Arches paper soaking for about 5 or 6 minutes, and that seems to be working okay for me. So while the paper's soaking in the bath, I've got some water, a clean dry tea towel that I'll use to sop up the water on the paper, and I've got a clean cloth as well. And I've also got my stapler here, and I'll tell you about that in a little while. So I get my paper out of the bath and then I lay it flat on my gator board. And then I take the clean tea towel and I just lay it over the top, and then I just absorb the moisture from the paper with that. So I just rub it over the top. And then when I'm sure that it's completely flat against the board, I wet the sticky side of one of the water activated tape strips that I cut earlier, just with the wet sponge. You can also use a wet brush. And then once that's wet, I turn it around and I line it up with those dots that I measured on the paper. I just like to make sure that the tape goes on straight. And then I just flatten it out with my hand. I rub it over a few times. And then I do that all the way around the edges of the paper. So I wet each strip and then I lay it on the paper like that and flatten it out. So when I've got it like this, then I start to put some staples in. Now the reason I use the staples is because in the past the water activated tape has started to lift off the paper, and then my paper didn't dry flat. It was starting to pucker. So I had to take it all off and re-wet it in the bath and do it all again. So now what I do is I put some staples in it to prevent that from happening, just to make sure. Now you can skip the water activated tape and just use the staples, but I like the water activated tape because it just makes the paper really quite flat, and the staples are just an added bonus. And when I'm stapling into this gator board, because it's foam, it's soft, and I've got to put a lot of staples in. So I put them really close together all the way around the edge of the paper. Now that that's done, I've got to give the paper some time to dry. And to do that, I must leave the paper flat or horizontal on the table or on the floor. I don't stand it up vertically because that will cause the paper to dry unevenly. So I've let it dry overnight and I've come back and the paper's perfectly flat. And wouldn't you know, I didn't need to put the staples in because the water activated tape has stuck all the way around. Sometimes, as I said, it will lift off the paper and then, you know, that causes the paper to pucker. This time it didn't, so I didn't really need the staples, but it's good to have them there just to make sure that the paper doesn't lift. Now I'm just using my eraser here just to rub over some of the pencil drawing. I've taken it down too far. Because this painting touches the edge of the paper, I want to leave just a small white edge along the bottom. So I've just got to take a bit of the drawing off. So when I say a white edge along the bottom of the paper there, I just want to leave it like I have here with Chelsea, how I haven't taken the painting all the way to the bottom. That just gives me an edge that I can hide behind a mat when I frame it. Otherwise, you frame the painting and some of it gets hidden behind the mat if you don't leave the white edge. So I've just got some washi tape here that I've cut, and I'll just run that along the bottom of the painting. I use the washi tape because it's low tack. It doesn't stick down really hard, so when I take it off it won't damage the paper. The other thing I have to do before I start painting is just rub out some of these pencil lines just to make them a little bit lighter in colour. I don't want them showing through the yellow paint when I'm finished. Okay, so I'm going to use Winsor & Newton's Winsor Lemon to wash in all of the petals. This is Winsor Lemon here. It's a transparent colour. Now you don't have to use Winsor Lemon, you can use any bright yellow just to wash the petals in. So this is Winsor Lemon here in my palette. So I'm going to paint this on dry paper all over the petals. If you'd rather paint it on damp paper, you can wet each petal first before you paint it. You want to make sure that your pencil lines are as light as you can get them before you start painting with yellow paint, because it's very hard to remove the pencil line once the yellow goes down. Okay, so I've washed all the petals in with the Winsor Lemon, and then I've drawn in some detail on the centre part. Now what I want to do is bring some lemon down further, because you can see the base of the petal through the centre of the flower. So I've just got to take that lemon down just a bit further into the centre part of the flower. So on this petal here, and also on this one up here. So I'll just pull it down into my drawing here. And that space in between these two petals, I can just see the top of a petal showing through. So I've got to put a bit of yellow paint there as well. So just in here, I can just see the top of the petal showing through. So everything's dry now. I've dried it with the hairdryer, and now I'm wetting the centre part of the sunflower. I'm using my Casineo brush because it's bigger and it lays the water down fairly quickly. And then I can switch to my Maestro brush, the smaller one, just to take the water to the edge of the petals. So now I want to paint a layer of watery sepia over the top of the centre. So I've just got to paint the jagged edges over here, and then I've got to run the paint carefully around the edges of all the petals. So I don't want it to be too dark just yet. I want to keep it fairly light. So I've mixed a bit of water in with the sepia. And now I'm just painting it carefully around the petals. I'm not paying any attention to what's happening with the paint in the centre part of the flower. I'm just placing all my attention around the edge of these petals. So I want to get them nice and neat and clean. And then I can just run it along the base of those little spiky things. And then I can just fill in the centre, just with the watery sepia. So as I said, don't make it too dark too quickly. We just want this light colour first. And now I've got my liner brush and I'm just tidying up any edges where I couldn't get close enough to the petal. And I think I'll just rough this edge up along here a bit so that it doesn't look so straight. Okay, so everything's dry now. And what I want to do is just deepen the colour on the centre of the sunflower. So I'm just going to wet it with some water again. This time I don't have to be quite so careful with the water around the edges. I'm going to use sepia again, but this time I've got lots of pigment mixed into it. So it's quite dark. So then I just take it around the edges again, and then I let it bleed up into the centre of the flower. So once I get around the edge of the petal, I can just sort of push the paint up into the middle. You can see that it's quite dark, so there's lots of pigment mixed into that watery mix. So go all the way around. And then I go around the other side as well. So all of this is on damp paper. Now I've waited a couple of minutes and now I'm just dropping in some water. I want to try and create just a little bit of texture on the surface. So if I drop some water in, it just disturbs the pigment. So now that it's dry, what I want to do is deepen the colour on the very centre of the centre. So I'm just drawing a line for myself just to guide myself. Just so I know where to put the paint. Now I'm wetting the whole centre part, not just that part where I just drew. And now I've got some really dark paint. It's virtually just out of the tube. And I just paint that into the part where I've just drawn that centre part of the centre. And because the whole centre of the flower is wet, that paint bleeds and it gives me soft edges. So I sort of stay inside the area where I've got my pencil line, but the whole paper is wet, the whole centre is wet. And that just gives me those soft edges around the perimeter of it. So I'm just dabbing with my tip of my brush, just sort of dab, dab, dab with the paint that's virtually just out of the tube. And then I'm going to do the same thing around the outer edge of the centre, so where it's near the petals. I'm just going to deepen the colour there as well. So you'll probably have to re-wet this section because it might be dry by the time you've done the middle part. So I'm just re-wetting with water here. And then I just dab that thick paint onto the damp paper. So I still want to see some light areas. So you can see that I'm not completely covering it. So I've come along the far edge as well. Now everything's dry. And then what I want to do is start this petal at the back. So I'm just going to wet it with some water first. So once I've got water over the whole petal, I can paint on some gold ochre. Now the gold ochre that I used is squirted into my palette and it's gone hard. So what I did was just wipe my wet brush over the hard paint. So I've got a lot of pigment on my brush. Now if you haven't got gold ochre, you could use quinacridone gold or even yellow ochre, just as long as it's sort of a goldy orange colour like this. So I just keep painting that onto the damp paper. I'm going to run over my pencil line here. And now what I'm going to do is get some more of the Windsor lemon, and I just want to brighten up this yellow section here. So that's what we used to do the first initial wash. Okay, so that's the second layer on this petal. So this petal has dried now, and now I'm just re-wetting the left side with some water. And I want to put a second layer of some gold ochre on there. So I'm just going to run it down the left side of the groove that's there. So a little bit on the top, and then I just run it down the left side of that groove. And then I put some on the bottom again, where I put it last time. So just working on the damp paper. Now I'm going to wet the middle section of the petal with some water, and I'm just going to repeat the process. So a little bit of gold ochre down the groove, and then I'm just recoating over the top of that first layer of gold ochre. So I'm just deepening the colour. And now I do the same thing on this side. So I wet down that section with some water, and then I paint some gold ochre on. There's a bit of a glow on the petal down here on this right hand side, down low. So I'm just going to drop some of the Windsor lemon in there. So that's Windsor lemon. So now I dried that one off, and now I'm just painting some water on this petal that's next to it. And now I've got some gold ochre again. When I get closer to the top here, I'll stop, and then I'll just use my damp brush. So I'll wash the paint out of my brush, and then I dry it on the cloth, and then I just use it to soften the edge at the top there. There's no paint on my brush at the moment, it's just damp with water. And I've just done the same thing with this one next to it. So I put the Windsor lemon on it first, and then I painted the gold ochre over the top. And I sort of stopped the gold ochre short of the top, so it didn't go all the way to the top. And then you can just take a damp brush and soften the edge at the top if you need to. Now I've got some watery cadmium orange, and I'm just brightening up the left-hand side there with this. I've also put a little bit on this one. So this is the cadmium orange. Now I'm painting a layer of the Windsor lemon over the top of this petal, just to brighten it up before I paint the next layer. So while that Windsor lemon's still damp, I've got some gold ochre, and I'm just running it down the side. So I'm painting on the damp Windsor lemon with the gold ochre. So I've just got to soften this edge now. So just with a damp brush, so I've taken that paint out of my brush, and I can just run it up the side there just to soften the edge. Now I just want to dry it off, because I want to do the centre part. So I'm painting on dry paper here with some watery gold ochre. So the two side edges, I needed soft paint edges, but down the middle here, I've got two hard edges either side of that strip, so I could do that on dry paper. And now I've got some of the watery cadmium orange that I'm just painting onto the left-hand side to brighten it up. You can do this on dry paper. And then just use a damp brush to soften any edges. A little bit of cadmium orange here as well. So cadmium orange is an opaque colour, so whenever I use it I just make sure I put a bit of water in it just to water it down to make it more transparent. Okay, so this next one's really easy. I've just got to paint a layer of gold ochre over the top. So just water down the gold ochre with a bit of water and then just paint that over the top of the lemon. So I'm just going to skip that next petal and paint on this one over here. Just paint a layer of water over it. I just make sure there's no puddles of water forming. And then I use the gold ochre right up on the tip, and I'll just pull it down that line there. Take it up the other side as well. And then I push it up from the base of the petal up towards the top. So I want it darker at the base, and then I want that gap of yellow at the top there. So I wanted the water on the paper just to keep all the paint edges soft. Now I have some cadmium orange. If you can do this while your gold ochre is still damp, that's great. But if you find it starting to dry it off with a hairdryer and re-wet it with some water. So now I've dried everything off and I'm re-wetting with some water. This is burnt umber that I've got on my brush now. So just run that down the left side. And that just creates a darker area there. So I'm doing this on damp paper. Just putting a little bit of the burnt umber on that one as well. And over here too. So I'm just doing this on dry paper. Just painted a layer of Windsor lemon down here. And now I've got the gold ochre again, and I'm painting onto the damp Windsor lemon. And now I've got some of the burnt umber again. Paper's still damp. So as I said, if it starts to dry, you're better off drying it off and then re-wetting it. Now I want a layer of Windsor lemon on this one here. And then the gold ochre again onto the damp Windsor lemon. So I'm just following the shape of the petals too with my brush strokes. Just be careful that you don't make your brush strokes too stiff. So now I've got some cadmium orange painting on the damp paper. Some more cadmium orange here. Again, the paper is still damp. So I want that lemon area to still show through. So here I've got some burnt umber, and I can paint this on dry paper, and I can just soften my edges with the damp brush if I need to. Here I'm painting on dry paper with the gold ochre. I just want to fill in this petal here. It's only small, so I don't need to put any water on it before I paint it. I just want to soften this front edge though with the damp brush. So I'll just use the damp brush just to soften that front edge. So I'm painting a layer of Windsor Lemon over the top of this one just to brighten it up before I put the next colours on top. So all over it with some Windsor Lemon. And then I come in with some gold ochre while it's still damp. So I just sweep it around following the shape of the petal. I think this might be a bit damp though. I might need to wait a little while. Yeah, you can see how the paint just sort of gets away from you here. So I'll just have to clean that off and then just wait a moment just for it to absorb into the paper a little bit more, and then I'll do it. So we'll see if it's better now. I've waited about a minute or so. Yeah, it seems better now. So I've got the gold ochre again. Now the paper's still damp, but it just wasn't quite as wet as it was. So if that happens to you when you're painting and the paint sort of goes everywhere and you can't control it, just give it a few minutes and then try again. Sometimes I'm a bit impatient. So by painting on the damp Windsor Lemon paint then, that's just kept all those edges soft on that one. I just want to put a bit more colour on this one here, so I've just put some water there, and now I've got the cadmium orange. Just brightening it up. I find as it dries, it's never quite as bright as what it looked like when it was wet. I'll put a bit down in here as well. The paper's actually dry here, so I'll just soften the edge of the paint here. So you can brighten it up. You can either dampen the paper first and then put the paint on, or you can just use the watery paint and paint onto the dry paper and then just quickly use a damp brush just to soften away any hard edges that you don't like. So at the moment I'm just on the dry paper, and then I'll just take my damp brush, so there's nothing on it but just a small amount of water, and I'll just soften the edge. This one is dry now. I dried it with the hairdryer, and now I'm just wetting just down. There's a line on it or a groove. I just want to bring it in. So I'm just wetting this side of the line, and I'm going to run some gold ochre down there. So just a bit of gold ochre on my brush at the moment. There's also a line here that I can probably do this just on the dry paper, as long as your paint's fairly light in colour. And there's another one here that I'll just do on the dry paper. So I just want to give this area here another layer of the Winsor Lemon just to brighten it. And then while it's still damp, I come in with the gold ochre again. So the pigment's gone on a bit heavy there. I think I'll wash my brush out and then I'll just push that pigment over a bit. It's just gone on a bit heavy and concentrated in the one spot. So just move it out. So at the moment I don't have any paint on my brush, it's just damp. I'm just moving the paint around that's there. So now I want to work on this little twisted petal here. So I just want to work on this front edge first before I do anything else. So it just needs just a touch of Winsor Lemon on it, just on the dry paper. And then down the bottom here, it's a bit darker, so I'll just use the gold ochre. So there's sort of a dividing line running down the middle of this petal. So the top half, I'm just going to put some Winsor Lemon on it just to brighten it, just on the dry paper. So I'm just filling it in. And then before that Winsor Lemon dries, I'll just put a bit of gold ochre there, just along the crease where it folds over, and I'll just pull it down just slightly. And now on this other half that I haven't painted yet, I'm just going to put some Winsor Lemon on it, just on the dry paper. And now I want to get another colour out. This colour here is called Green Gold. It's a Winsor & Newton colour. This is a sort of a beautiful olivey green yellow colour. It's a really pretty colour. It's transparent, and I'm going to use it in places on the sunflower. So coming back to this one, I'm just putting some gold ochre on it. I'm working on the dry paper here. So I'm using the watery paint. And what I'll do is I'll just wash my brush out and dry it off, and then I can just use it just to soften the edge of the paint. So it's just damp, my brush at the moment, no paint on it. So now I've got some of the green gold on my brush. I'm just going to put it on the tip here. So you can either do this on damp paper or dry paper, it doesn't really matter. Now down in here, I'm going to leave a tiny little yellow gap on the left-hand side, and I'm going to fill the rest in with some of the burnt umber, just on the dry paper. And while that paint's damp, I'll come in with some deeper pigment, and I'll just dampen right down near the base here. And this is burnt umber taken from the top of the palette where the paint is. Now I just want to put just a small amount of the burnt umber on this edge that I left. So it's just watery burnt umber. And then I can come in with some more pigment, so taken from the top of the palette where the paint squirted out. I'll just darken down the bottom there. Now right up here, I can see just a little bit of the centre part of the flower just peeking through. So I'm just painting this on with some sepia, just on the dry paper. So it's peeking through there, and it also runs right down beside this petal. So just between the two of them. There's also a bit down here. So now I've got some of the green gold on my brush, and I'm just reinforcing the tip with the green gold just on the dry paper. So now I want just a small amount of the burnt umber, and I'm just going to darken just this area here. So straight onto the dry paper, and then I'm going to wash my brush out and then just use the damp brush just to soften the edge of the paint. Okay, so I'm just putting some Windsor lemon on this one now, just painting on the dry paper. So when I'm finished glazing over the top of this one, I'm just going to dry it off with the hairdryer. So it's dry now, and I just want to wet on the top side of that line, pencil line that I've got there. So I'm just going to wet the whole top side. And now I've got gold ochre again, painting onto the damp paper. And I haven't got enough paint, so I'll get some more. So still the gold ochre. I'll take it up and around the edge of this petal, the other one, and then just push it up. I won't take it all the way to the tip. So I just want to run it up along this pencil line. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so I've dried this one off with the hairdryer, and now I want to come in with some burnt umber, and I want to deepen the colour. So I'm just painting this on dry paper, so the burnt umber is watery. I've just got to paint it down at the base of the petal. Just looking at my reference photo as I paint. Now, let's put a little line here. Now, while that area is damp, I just want to drop some sepia in as well, just to deepen it further. I will have to come back to this one once it's dry and just fiddle with it a bit more. So that's just sepia. So this one's dry now. And I just want to deepen the colour right down low at the base of the petal. So this is just watery sepia again. And I'm just painting it on the dry paper. So I just want it down at the base of the petal. And up here, I just need some more of the Windsor lemon just washed over the top. So now that that Windsor lemon is dry, I'm just painting over the top with some of the gold ochre. So this is watery gold ochre, and I'm painting on the dry paper. There's a little tiny yellow strip or yellow gap. I can see it on the reference photo, so I've just left it there. So now I'm just softening the edge with my damp brush, and I want a bit more paint, so I've come in with my liner brush and some more gold ochre. There's a bit more of the gold ochre here too. Now while that paint's still wet, I want to come in with some more gold ochre, this time taken from the top of the palette, and I want to just darken along the edge here. And the reason I'm doing this is because I've got a pencil line there that I want to disguise. I can't rub it out now because the paint's already there, but this will just disguise it for me. So I've just painted a layer of the Winsor Lemon over the top of this one. And now I've dried it off because I want to work on dry paper here. So I've got some of the gold ochre again. I just paint it down near the base of the petal and I just pull it up. Little tiny bit there as well. So I'll put some Winsor Lemon on this one and some of the gold ochre. You can do this while that Winsor Lemon's still damp, or if you prefer you could just wait till it dries and then just paint this over the top. And now I've got some of the burnt umber that I'm just painting onto the damp gold ochre, just down at the base. And this one here, washing in the Winsor Lemon again just to brighten it, just like all the others. Now it's dry, and I've got the gold ochre again, just on the dry paper. I run it along the edge and I just bring it in slightly. Now I've switched to my liner brush and I've got some of the green gold on my brush and I just want to run it along the edge. You can do this on dry paper, and I run it down this edge as well. So it's just on the tip, but on the edge of the tip. And I just want to put a touch more gold ochre onto this one, just to separate it from that other petal. Okay, so moving down onto this large one here, I'm just brightening the colour with another layer of the Winsor Lemon. So when that layer of Winsor Lemon is dry, just start painting some gold ochre onto the right hand side of the petal. In a moment I'm going to wash my brush out, dry the brush, and then just use it to soften the edge of the paint here. When I say dry my brush, I just mean I dab it onto a cloth just to remove the excess moisture. So just softening the edge here now with the damp brush. And then I can pull some of that colour down further. Just onto the dry paper. So now what I want to do is wet the left hand side of that pencil line that runs down the petal. So if I just wet some water there, and what I want to do is run my brush down the pencil line and then have it bleed across to the left side of the line. So one side of this line is a hard edge, so that's the right hand side, and the left hand side is a soft edge. Now I've just taken some more up the back of the petal here, and I just pull a few strokes down. I can see a hard edge forming just on the other side of the petal that I just painted. So just here. So I need to soften that with the damp brush, just so it doesn't dry like that. So I've dried everything off, and now I'm just painting another layer of the Windsor Lemon. I just felt that it wasn't quite bright enough, so I've just put the Windsor Lemon all over the top there. And then when that's dry, I'm going to come in now with another layer of the gold ochre. So I'm just painting on the dry paper here. Looking at the petal now that it's dry, it's just not quite as bright as I wanted it to be. So this is just glazing over the top, and it's just brightening the colour up. So now I want to come in with a touch of the green gold as well over the top of that. So while it's still damp, so I haven't dried it or anything, I've just got a bit of the green gold. You can do this on dry paper if you prefer. And then what I'm going to do is just soften the edge of the green gold. So when you soften edges with your paintbrush, you've got to do it almost immediately after the paint's been laid down, otherwise it'll dry and you won't be able to soften it. And you've got to make sure that your brush is just slightly damp. If it's too wet, then you just risk water running everywhere, and if it's too dry, then it doesn't work either. So just got to have just a small amount of moisture in the brush. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just softening the edge of the paint. So you've got to work fairly quickly. And now I've got some cadmium orange, and I just want to put a little bit of that on there as well. Just at the base. So again, if you're worried about touching your work while it's damp and you're worried about paint lifting, just dry it off and then put this on. Just softening the edge again now. Okay, so I'm painting on dry paper here with the gold ochre. Just make sure the petal next to this one is not still damp. You want it to be dry. And all the way through this painting, just make sure you follow the shape of the petals with your brush strokes. So this is just the gold ochre on the dry paper. A little bit more, I'm just going to take this down just a touch further. And now I'm going to paint some burnt umber onto that damp gold ochre. So this just goes onto the damp gold ochre. Now if you find it's easier to work on dry paper to do this, we'll just dry the gold ochre off and then put the burnt umber over the top, and then just soften any hard edges with your damp brush. So now I'm washing out the paint and it's just damp, and I can use my brush to soften it. Now I can do that when the paper's damp. Now you might have trouble doing that. If you find you get into a bit of a mess, just dry your paint off between layers and then just paint the new colours over the top when they're dry, and then just soften any edges you need to with a damp brush. So everything's dry on mine now, and what I want to do is just put another layer of the gold ochre over the top. Just as it dries, it's not quite as vibrant as I'd hoped, so I've just got to do it more than once. So this is gold ochre again. So I've put the gold ochre on, then I put the burnt umber on, and now I'm putting some more gold ochre on. So now I've got some of the cadmium orange again, which is just watery cadmium orange. I'm going to soften the edge in a minute with my damp brush. So that's what I'm doing now. And then I get a bit more of the watery burnt umber, and I'm just deepening this side now. So I just had to do the layering more than once just to get enough colour on the petal. So now what I'm going to do is dry it off, and I'm going to paint a wash of the Windsor lemon over the top of the whole petal just to brighten it up again. So this is the Windsor lemon. Make sure you dry it off before you do this though. Okay, so I've dried the whole petal off now, and I'm using just a touch more of the burnt umber and my liner brush, just adding a bit more detail to it. I'm also going to put a tiny bit of colour onto the one next to it as well. So this is the burnt umber, and I'm working on dry paper. Now I want to put some gold ochre onto the underside of this petal next to them. So this is just the watery gold ochre on dry paper. So while that's still wet, I'm just going to drop a bit more colour onto it, just to deepen the colour slightly. So that's dry now. And now I've got some more gold ochre. So I've mixed some more pigment into the watery paint just to make it darker. And now I'm just painting a bit of detail on the underside. So this just gives it a few directional strokes. So it just needs to be slightly darker than the layer of paint that you've just put on there. And do this on dry paper. So now that that's dry, it's not quite the colour that I wanted it to look like when it was dry. So I'm just painting a layer of watery green gold over the top, just on the dry paper. So a wash of Windsor lemon over the top of the front of the petal, and then that needs to dry. I'm also washing it on the inside part of the petal as well, or the underside. That needs to dry. And then I'm painting on some of the green gold. So it's a bit lighter on this right side, but when I go into the middle now, you can see that it's a bit darker. So I've put a little bit more pigment into it. So this is the green gold. So it was the Windsor lemon first, then I dried it off, and then I put the green gold. And then I put a bit more of the green gold into it and darkened it as I went across the petal. Here I'm using sepia and my liner brush, and I'm just adding a bit of detail at the back here. What I want to do is to try and make that back of the petal recede more into the centre of the flower, so it's not quite standing out quite so much. So that's just sepia. And if you have any hard edges, you can soften them with a damp brush. So just a bit more sepia on this one as well. Okay, so now just a layer of the Windsor Lemon again on this one, just to brighten it up. And then down in here, I'm just painting some sepia. It's a little area behind the petal. Just using my liner brush. If you put it on too heavy, just take a tissue and dab some of it off. You don't want it too dark. And now I've got some of the gold ochre and I'm just painting this onto the dry paper. Okay, so now I'm wetting down the left side of my pencil line with some water, and then I run the gold ochre down the line. So just like the other petal that I did earlier, it's giving me a hard edge on the right hand side of the line and a soft edge on the left hand side of the line. I just want a bit more gold ochre pulled down here as well. It's very light in colour. So over here I'm doing the same thing. I wet down the left side of my pencil line, and then I run the gold ochre down that same side. Now I've got some green gold, that's the watery green gold, and I'm just painting it over the top of that gold ochre, just on the dry paper. Just tones down the brightness of the petal. And now I'm just washing over some Windsor Lemon on the next one. So when that Windsor Lemon dries, I put some gold ochre over the top, just on the dry paper. So it's watery gold ochre. Just softening the edge with a damp brush now. Now just wet down again at the left side of my pencil line, and I'm running the gold ochre down the pencil line. So don't put your water right over the top of the pencil line, put it to the left of the pencil line. Same on this one. So I've just got a bit more gold ochre there now. So everything is dry, and now I'm coming in with some of the burnt umber. Just deepening that colour right down in there underneath that other petal. So painting this on dry paper with the watery burnt umber. And if you're quick enough before this dries, you can come in with some sepia right up the top there underneath that other petal. So that's what I'm doing now with the liner brush, but I'm doing this on the damp burnt umber. So if you're quick enough, you can do it on the damp burnt umber. If you're not quick enough, you can dry it off, re-wet it with water, and then do it with the sepia. Or you can do it on the dry paper and then just soften your edges with a damp brush. So you've got three options. This is a bit more of the burnt umber now, just running it down that far edge, just on the dry paper. And then I need just a bit more colour here on the side. This is gold ochre, watery gold ochre. Or you could use a green gold, it doesn't matter. And then just a bit more of the gold ochre down on the tip. I'm just defining the tip a bit more. Again, this is just on the dry paper. So this one here, I'm just painting a wash of gold ochre over the top. So this is watery gold ochre. And then when it's dry, I just start to run some of the burnt umber just down the left side of it. I have to give you the side version of this because my hand was in the way of the camera over the top. So this is a bit of the green gold that I'm just painting on dry paper. Just sweeping it up, following the shape of the petal. So watery green gold on dry paper. And now just a touch more of it. Sorry, my hand was in the way again. So this is just the green gold on the dry paper. Now I've got some Windsor lemon and I'm just brightening up the areas that I didn't paint, just with a bit more of the lemon. Again, do this on dry paper. So now, instead of washing in the Windsor lemon over the top of this one, I'm using watery gold ochre instead, because these petals here are in shadow, so they're a bit darker than the other ones, and I think I'll do all the other ones while I'm at it. So I'll just get some more of the watery gold ochre and I'll just paint it straight over the top of the Windsor lemon on the dry paper. So all the remaining petals will have that colour, except for the turn back on this one here. So just leave that as Windsor lemon. So I'm just putting a bit more colour in this little section here with some burnt umber. And now I want to work on this one here. So I'm just working on dry paper here with the green gold. Just using watery paint. And now I've painted the other side with the green gold and I've just left a little tiny gap of the Windsor lemon showing through here. So while that paint's damp, I just want to come in with some darker pigment. So I've picked up the paint up near where I squirted it out on the palette, just so that I can get that darker pigment there. I just run it along that line with my liner brush. So this is the green gold that I'm still working with. And I just want to define the tip a bit further. And this is green gold again. I'm just washing it over the dry paper with my Maestro brush just to darken the colour. So watery green gold on dry paper. I've got the green gold here as well. Just using my liner brush just to define the tip of this petal. And this is a bit of the gold ochre. And now I'm coming back in with some more of that pigment so it's picked up from the top of the palette where the paint was squirted out. Just going to draw in a line on this one just to guide myself. Now I've got some gold ochre on the bottom side of the line, just painting on dry paper. Now I've got the green gold. So where the two colours meet, I just sort of rub over them so that I don't get a hard paint line there. Before that paint dries, I've just got some burnt umber now. I'm just running it along the pencil line. So I just want it to bleed into this area that I've just painted. I've put a bit more there now. So this is burnt umber on damp paper. If you find yours is drying, dry it off and then re-wet it. Some more of the green gold on this side. And then while that's damp, some more of the burnt umber. And now I'm coming in with some more paint. So that's burnt umber on the damp paint. Now some green gold on this one. This is dry paper again. And some on this one as well. Now I'm coming back with my liner brush just to add a bit more detail with some of the burnt umber. So I'm just deepening the colour. So this is just on dry paper. So now I can start to paint in the little stalks of the stamens. I think they're called stamens. I'm just using green gold. Just painting on the dry paper. I'm just painting a few in here and there. And then I'll move on to the sepia and I'll paint all the small dark spots. So this is the sepia now. And I'm just sort of scribbling with my brush. I'm not painting perfect little round circles. So I'm just scribbling or wobbling the brush, trying not to be too neat and tidy. So I'm just using the side of my brush and I'm just sort of wobbling it from side to side. And I can paint it fairly quickly because I'm trying not to paint it as though they're perfect little circles. I'll add a few more here as well. Just little splodges of paint. It's fairly dark paint, so pick it up right up where you've squirted it out. So now I want to paint some water on this centre part of the centre. I can still see my pencil line through the sepia. So what I want to do is try and disguise it. So if I just rub some really dark sepia over my pencil line, just in places, that'll just disguise it. You won't see it. So I'm just doing the same thing. I'm rubbing the side of my brush. And this is sepia virtually straight out of the tube. Now I've just put some cadmium orange here and here. And now I'm going to put a bit just in here. So this is watery cadmium orange. And I'm just painting it on the dry paper. A little bit up here as well. If you don't have an orange, just mix an orange with red and yellow. Now I've got some watery gold ochre and I'm just washing it over this petal at the back. It just needs to be a bit darker It's too bright the way it was. I'll put a bit on this one as well. Just extending the tip of it there. So this is the end of part 1 of the sunflower. In the next video, I'll show you how I painted the leaves and the stem.